asking you. All right, my friends, good morning to you. Today is Monday. Monday is the day I remind you that the mission of the Masters, which is the work that I do, is supported by all of you wonderful souls who benefit from it. So you can support either on an ongoing basis by going to the Patreon website, which is a wonderful, innovative idea for supporting creative work of all types. It's fun to just peruse the website, whatever decisions you make for your resources. Or you can go to my website, which is ashajoy.org, and you can find a donation button there, and I'm grateful for everything that you offer in. It helps very much for me to have people help me with the technical and with the social media promotion, and just makes it all work wonderfully well. And you've been marvelously generous, and I'm deeply grateful. We're also working to finish translating Light Bearer into Spanish, to publish the Spanish edition, to publish the Italian edition. I don't think we've quite started on a German edition, but it lurks in the shadows back there. All of that is thanks to all of you. So, and also please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're trying to break 10,000 and we're several hundred short, so we need some help. Exactly why we're trying to break 10,000, I'm not sure, but I understand it's a good thing to do. So if you haven't subscribed, please do so and invite your friends to do so. So now, let us pray and we'll start our day. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence guiding and blessing us, that we may live in this world with the constant awareness that you are always with us, that everything that comes to us is perfectly designed for our happiness and well-being. We are your children. Take us home to thee. Om, peace. Amen. We are working the Ananda way of life based on the guidelines of conduct for members of the Ananda Sevaka order. And we are in the very last paragraph of Article 6, which is about marriage. We've spent a number of days on this section because it's an exceedingly important one. So here is the last paragraph. It says, if a married couple find themselves facing disagreements in their relationship that cannot be resolved quickly on their own, they should seek the counsel of a minister or spiritual director who can help them to find solutions to reestablish harmony. This is in further keeping with the expectations for members, as explained in Article 2, for the well-being of both the couple and of the community. So going back to Article 2, which is community life defined. And he says here, life in a community is in a sense like marriage. So here we're going to say marriage is a lot like life in a community. For whatever one member does affects everyone. Whatever hurts one is hurtful to all. And whatever benefits one accrues to the benefit of all. As one member develops spiritually, all members develop. And as one diminishes, all thereby diminish to some extent also. Such a life then cannot reasonably entail a strong affirmation of personal freedom and independence. In any personal decision, the welfare of all should be taken into account. In every member's search for personal happiness, the happiness of the other members should also be considered. Therefore, Ananda members should work together always in a spirit of unity and never with selfishness or pride. They should endeavor to help one another on every level, physical, mental, and spiritual. The help they offer, moreover, should never be imposed. It should be tendered with respect and love, rather in full awareness that a sincere effort offer confers no obligation. I'm going to find one other paragraph to read, which is really important in this context. Ananda members, this is Article 5, it's called Personal Habits. Ananda members should sift mentally through their personal habits and not continue unthinkingly in old patterns of behavior merely because of some prior momentum that has been established in their lives. So coming back here, if a married couple find they have disharmony that can't be quickly resolved, they should ask for help. That just sounds so self-evident, doesn't it? But trust me, it is not self-evident, because we tend to continue unthinkingly in habits just because of prior momentum. Marriage is a very close friendship, and it has lots of other elements to it that get very, very complicated, but primarily at its heart, it is a very close friendship. But it's a close friendship of a kind that has a tendency to obscure the fundamental nature of it. Expectations, dependencies, vulnerabilities, responsibilities, obligations, distractions, especially when you start having children. You have to start working together to raise those children. Those children bring new karmas into the house that were not there when it was just the two adults. All kinds of things. One of my friends that I spoke to recently, who has two young children, talked about the fact, he said, the first child made parenting look easy. The second child is an entirely different story. I was talking about a friend of mine who, her last child, she had several children, her last child just loved the word no, just liked it above all other words, and just used it randomly no matter what the circumstances were. These things happen. As Swami says, speaking of children, we have a very romantic idea of how wonderful our children are going to be, but as he says, they're just total strangers that we invite into the house for 20 years or so. No, they're not total strangers because we have karmic links to them, but they bring in their own karma. And even to married people who do their very best to make a good choice, this is a long-range commitment, and people go through many different phases in their lives. And there is this strange idea, and this is these habits that continue unthinkingly, that somehow we should be able to figure this out by ourselves. And that is really one of those questions that you should ask yourself over and again, over again. Why? Why should we be able to figure this out on our own? In our particular society, at this particular time, where most people have an example of one marriage, which is their parents' marriage, and many people in this society do not come from intact families, which is to say the one marriage that they were close to disintegrated, or even if it's still physically intact, it may be clear that it's not the ideal relationship that we're looking for ourselves. Every other thing we know about marriage comes from music, movies, novels, television shows, and what they all have in common is that they are fiction. You can see I'm passionate about this because I've spent hundreds of hours in my life trying to help couples through this situation. And the thing that astonishes me the most, that impresses me the most, is that we know nothing. Just collectively, we know nothing. We just don't. And what images we do have were impressed upon us from a culture that is sexually obsessed, fundamentally selfish. Just the yuga that we're in right now, people are just reaching out for what they can get. And as I said at the very beginning of this, marriage is seen as this isolated entity in which we're supposed to just do all these things for each other, which are extremely unlikely. It's too much of a burden to put on one another. Then you add to that this idea that we're supposed to already know how to do this. I mean, we don't even know how to run our own computers. We go somewhere and ask somebody to tell us when it's just an objective thing that, can be studied. But we get into something where lifetimes of confusing karma and incredibly deep, complicated psychological, emotional, and spiritual issues are at play. And we think we're supposed to be able to solve it. It's just like, why? Because we're protecting our delusions, that's why. And that's just, we cannot continue unthinkingly just because of prior momentum. Because, for a very simple reason, it doesn't bring the happiness we seek. So at the very least, Swamiji is putting here, when we have disharmonies that are not easily resolved. Now, of course, many disharmonies are easily resolved. But when we really find ourselves up against these very difficult, insoluble issues, it's no sign of weakness to admit, I don't really quite know how this works. We're communicating in the way that we saw the people around us communicate, and their lives are no example to us. They're just the lives that we have to happen to know. So, and here we are, we have a very different objective if we're trying to follow the Ananda way of life. We're not just trying to carve out for ourselves a sort of little, self-contained nest in which, and here's this word again, I can be safe. I mean, we do want to be safe. We do want to really trust the people around us. We do need to have friendships that we can rely upon. I mean, the first chakra is this desire for security. But the purpose of our relationships is to expand beyond what we already are, not to nestle down so that we can just stay that way. And I mean, the way I like to think about it, quite simply, is coaching. And I know nowadays that is how people talk about a whole lot of things that we used to think of as therapy or counseling, but it's just coaching. It's like, how do we talk to each other in a situation like this? And of course, nowadays, people, have multiple marriages. It's just the way it is. Even the people at Ananda, I once went through, everybody that I knew at Ananda at that time, and the majority of them had already been married and divorced. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but this is the world that we live in. Swami made a comment once. He said that he didn't think marriage and romantic relationships, in our culture would be in order for at least a couple of generations. He said we have to raise children very differently. He said first of all, we have to really teach them about sexual energy, which we never do. In our society, we give these very embarrassing physiological classes to teenagers, and then we, as masters put it, at their most vulnerable stage, we put them alone in a car surrounded by romantic music. He said, and we're so surprised that they're making decisions, based on compelling biological reasons rather than common sense. Was it Master or Swami? I'm not sure who said. They just talked about, Master talked about it. He said most marriages, and I'm not speaking of Ananda, most marriages are a union between a nice shade of lipstick and a bow tie. That's how he put it. He said they listen to a lot of romantic music. The romantic music causes these, feelings to arise in them, and they think that the feelings are being caused by the person they're with. And then they marry. And then Master put it, and then they wake up to diapers and bills and diapers, and they don't quite know how they got there. Now, Ananda is much better than that, but not completely out of it, because, and those of you who, don't have the support of living in a spiritual community surrounded by more advanced, more experienced devotees than yourselves, we are really swimming upriver on this one. And we all have to really work together. And collectively in our communities, we really do work together, partly because we have these very long friendships. So even a marriage relationship in a loving familial community which is what Ananda provides, we can at least move that quarter inch out of having an unreasonable expectation about the isolated unit being sufficient. A marriage is a unique kind of friendship, and it does give you a haven. I'm hesitating to use the word safe haven, but it does give you a safe haven. Should give you a safe haven. A place where you really are understood and respected and supported for who you are. But in the context of community, much more is possible. But a great deal of pride comes into this, which is where I think in Article 2, Swami uses the word pride, and I read all that I read because of the word pride. Here it is. Ananda members should therefore work together always in a spirit of unity and never with selfishness or pride. And what also happens between couples is one half of the couple is very eager to have coaching, and the other half thinks we ought to be able to do it ourselves. And it's extremely impressive to me how we don't listen to each other. We don't really hear that what's working for you is not working for me. And this is the kind of thing that a third person, third party, can just perceive. Now, the thing about this is that, and this is where it comes earlier, Article 2 is about community life. It cannot necessarily affirm too independent a life. So even from the very beginning, when in an earlier paragraph in this section about marriage, Swami talks about that, when the decision to marry or not, arises, that's the point at which we begin to talk to someone, preferably even before a deep commitment is made to one another. One discusses it with someone who has a more objective, impersonal sense of your own well-being. Because we have lots of forces within us. We have lots of impulses. I was very interested when a friend of mine went to speak to a psychic woman. And she's a very reputable and talented psychic. It's a person that I've known for decades, and I have a lot of respect for what she does. But it was very interesting to me because I was had a certain attitude toward my friend about what I thought would be beneficial in her life. She was pulling in another direction. She was pulling more toward what is common in the world. I was hoping to pull her a little more into the Ananda way of thinking about things. She went to the psychic. The psychic person told her exactly what she was thinking. Now, I really can't say one way or another. This is a person from years ago who followed the psychic's advice and long since left the world that I live in. But what was so interesting to me is the psychic read her subconscious perfectly. And so my friend felt totally like this is absolutely right, because this was exactly what she wanted. And she has gone through and followed it. I mean, I'm not really going to say one way or another, even if she was wrong. But it was interesting to me that a psychic is not a saint. This psychic was not a saint. Very good woman, very good person. I don't object to anybody going to see her. But a guru, and this is how Swami puts it too, the guru doesn't just read what your dominant energy is. The guru can read that still small voice that's calling you to something else. So what so often happens in the deep friendship that is called marriage is that habits and energy begins to build up. Defensiveness begins to build up. Long-standing disagreements that can't be resolved begin to build up. And the subconscious mind just begins to hold on. And it's a very hard energy for people facing each other, as all of these momentums get going, prior momentum seems to rule. So it takes a great deal of humility. And it also just takes a great deal of courage to put ourselves out like this. Now here's the fun thing about it, and this is me speaking from years of community life. I'm going to start with Kriya when I talk about this, which is our Kriya is the primary meditation technique. At some point somewhere in the early 80s, I think it was, that Swami for the first time gave a whole weekend devoted to Kriya. You would think that would be odd, but that's actually what happened. Anyway, he started. That was the first time he gave the higher initiations, and we had this session. And he did a lot of question and answer about Kriya practice. Now, prior to that, Swami had given many, many Kriya initiations. I'd attended, all of them actually, because there I was, and even traveled in Europe with Swami, and he did Kriya there, and I'm just in lots of places. But during that particular weekend, people wrote in questions, didn't just raise their hand, but wrote them in. And now I'm going to skip back a little bit. There's Peanuts cartoons by Charles Schulz, which was a part of my growing up. I always loved the Peanuts cartoons. I don't know if they're still active now. I know it's animated cartoons and a Broadway show, but it just used to be little cartoons. And there's this character called Lucy. And Lucy was a know-it-all. And Lucy set up a psychiatric booth. And she just had a little child's booth, like a lemonade stand, and it said, the psychiatric something or another. I think it was the word psychiatrist, badly spelled, but that was the word psychiatrist. The psychiatrist is in. And Charlie Brown, who's the other character, sort of the fall guy for everyone else, he comes and he sits and he pours his heart out to the psychiatrist, all the things that are wrong with him. It also says psychiatrist 5 cents. That's how much it costs. So after he pours his heart out for 3 or 4 panels, the psychiatrist, Lucy, says, "You're no different than anyone else. 5 cents, please." Like that. And it's always been sort of the joke for those of us who've been called upon to do a lot of counseling. You're no different than anyone else. 5 cents, please. So here we are in this Kriya, and people protect. And I protect, my shortcomings. I don't know why we do that, but we do that. We protect our shortcomings. I'm sitting there listening to these questions, and what do you know? I'm no different than anyone else. All this stuff that I thought was just such a sign of, the end of the world for me, turns out like half my community is having the same experiences. It's like, oh, this is not an aberration. This is not a sign of some terrible failure. This is what it is. This is how the process works. This is the rock that we run into in the road. Oh, and this is how we get it off the road so we can go forward. And it's both liberating and horribly embarrassing in something as intimate as marriage to find out that we're no different than everyone else. The specifics of our particular story are always the specifics of our particular story. We have this long history of parental this and past life that and trauma here and, lifetimes of disappointed hopes over here. And believe me, I'm not minimizing the absolute anguish of these experiences. Been there, done that, my friends. I know this. I know this lifetime. I know this many previous lifetimes, which is why I had in the past did so much of this kind of counseling. It's a tough story. The fact that it's common doesn't make it any less. It takes everything we have to get through this. There was a wonderful story that Jyotish would tell about when the community, like in the early 70s, and we were just beginning to build it, and everything was done just the minimum because we had so little money and there was so much that needed to be done. And Jyotish had a dome that he'd built in the early years, and there was a little porch, but it was built on a slant. So there was a little porch. So to get up onto the porch, eventually, it would be nice to have a couple of steps, but a couple of steps was more work than was essential to live, so it was just the porch and this giant step. And there was this little girl, her name was Cece. She was a very powerful little girl. And she was about 3 or 4, and she used to come over to visit Jyotish. And he heard her outside one day, and she was struggling to get up on the porch because it was a bit of a big step. And so he heard her sort of flailing around out there trying to get on. And then he heard her say, "This is going to take my full blast," she said like that. And she sort of threw herself up on the porch because Cece's full blast was really something to remember. And for many years, that was also how we would think. We would remember Cece and we would think, this is going to take my full blast. You know, we have this idea of what this unique friendship can give to us, but we don't always have an idea of what it will take from us to create this. And full blast doesn't even begin to express it. And so we need all the help we can get. And when we have those friends whose love for us is impersonal and whose wisdom we trust, then they can guide us through this in ways that, from my experience, almost literally never occur to us on our own. Just the dynamic gets too confused. And we have to just, begin to understand. And, marriage is two people. So it's a reality that it's not just straightening out our own reality, it's straightening out our own reality together. And we start these relationships with tremendous high expectations. And we even say to ourselves, I'm willing to work at this, I'm willing to do that. But when it really comes down to it, it's nice. These are all wonderful theories. And see, the thing about it is, we always imagine the way that we're going to work. We have, even in our heads, we have an idea of what it means to work on a friendship like this, which is almost always not what we end up having to do, because our minds go along familiar paths. And the very nature of the growth potential of building a friendship that'll last a lifetime like this, almost by its very nature, it's going to surprise you. Because if we knew in advance, we would already be halfway there. But we don't, because it's an adventure that we've never been on before. And the more openly and eagerly we can go and say, wow, we're up against a boulder and we don't know how to move it. And so Swami puts it right into the guidelines. If the harmony cannot be restored easily, seek advice, seek coaching, seek help, seek prayer. Don't let the habit of privacy and I can do it and pride and fear keep you trapped. We're all in this together. We're just all in this together. The suffering of one causes everyone to suffer. The expansion of consciousness and the freedom of one lifts everyone. We owe it to each other, as well as to ourselves, to take the circumstances life has given us and take the resources God has given us and use them to draw closer to Him. So this is Swamiji's advice to us, which will take us far on our journey to self-realization. God bless you, my friends.